Hello everyone, this is Balkwell. I'm Balkwell, and welcome to my Pleasure Dome. It's the year 2023. I'm here again, and with me is my good friend Kubla Khan. I don't know if that's going to be in focus. Kubla Khan, the original Pleasure Dome decreer. You may remember that in Xanadu did Kubla Khan a stately Pleasure Dome decree. And I'm here today for two reasons. The first is to decree my own stately pleasure dome, which you see around me. I'm decreeing that this is a pleasure dome. Secondly, I'd like to read an essay that I wrote called, I'll tell you what it's called, but first I'll tell you what it's about. First, I'll tell you that it makes reference to Kubla Khan, the poem, not necessarily the individual, but the poem where he decreed his stately pleasure dome. But the second subject and the main subject of this essay is Neil Young, who is a rock and roll man of world renown. And a good friend of mine, and a hero of mine. This essay concerns his song Cortez the Killer from the album Zuma, which if you haven't heard that song, I'd recommend giving it a listen. I'll put in the description of this video a link to another video, which is Neil Young playing the song Cortez the Killer live. I don't have it up, but I believe it's the early 1990s. And he looks a mess, as you want. He's like a man possessed, and he plays a very nice performance of Cortez the Killer. I'm going to assume you know the song because I'm just going to read this essay about the song. And if you don't know it, you'll probably figure it out, I guess. You won't have too much trouble. Anyway, this is called Neil Young's Mesoamerica, and it's written by me, Balkwell, and it's being read by me, Balkwell, within my Pleasure Dome to you, the reader, the listener, and the individual. Neil Young's Mesoamerica. Neil Young is a rocker. At 77 years old, Neil Young right now has more rock and roll flowing through him than anyone else in the world. The man was born to rock. Neil Young writes songs about all sorts of things. He's written hundreds of songs. He has often said that he doesn't edit his songs, he just writes them and then he plays them. The songs emerge from deep within him, or perhaps they emerge from somewhere else and he just captures them. It's hard to say exactly. Over the course of his career, certain motifs have appeared consistently within Neil Young's songs. One of these is pre-Columbian civilizations. This essay is about Neil Young's Mesoamerica, but actually there are songs about non-Mesoamerican people too, like the Inca, and then there are songs that aren't necessarily about any group in particular, but clearly point to some sort of pre-Columbian world. These places are all a part of Neil Young's Mesoamerica. It's not necessarily the case that the more precisely the topic or group is denoted, the more precise and focused the song is. Songs that are explicitly about Maya or Inca aren't really about Maya or Inca at all. They're about the images which the words Maya and Inca prompt in Neil Young's head. It says on Wikipedia that Neil Young wrote Cortez the Killer while in a history class in high school. If this is true, this might be the last documented evidence of Neil Young opening a history book. The man is not a scholar, he's a poet, and he's a rocker. He doesn't need any book to tell him about anything. In the documentary film Year of the Horse, we see Neil Young on a tour bus with a man who's reading Ken's Guide to the Bible, a book that, according to its promotional blurb, promises to, quote, take you directly to the naughty parts and wastes no time on the stuff you already know, end quote. The man on the bus with Neil Young is quoting Matthew 5:30. It is better for you to lose one part of your body than for your whole body to go to hell, he says. The Bible's quite a book, isn't it? Neil Young replies. Never really read it from this point of view. We then cut to Neil Young saying, the Old Testament is related to the New Testament. What's the Old Testament? The man beside him says, the Old Testament is before Christ. Before Christ? It's Moses and all that. And it's when God is really pissed all the time. The man continues reading. God will shatter the heads of his enemies, the hairy crown of those who walk in their guilty ways, that you may bathe your feet in blood. Here Neil Young looks at the camera, leans his head to one side, mouth agape. So that the tongues of your dogs may have their share from the foe. God asks you to let your dogs lick up the blood of your enemies after you butcher them, the man says to Neil Young. Oh, says Neil Young, his chin in his hand. Is God pissed because he created man, and then man turned out to be man? Neil Young's friend then quotes a passage from Ezekiel. Wow, says Neil Young. God is like, well, I now think of what I was doing when I planted a bunch of trees and I thought they were going to be one way, and then they turned out not to be the way I wanted them, and I chopped them all down. This brief conversation tells us quite a lot about Neil Young as a thinker. During the 51 years of his life up to that point, he had never put much serious thought towards the Bible as a book. He didn't know the difference between the Old and New Testament, or we could more generously conclude that he had once known and then forgotten. And yet he immediately captures the spirit of what is being told him, connects it to an idea from his own heart, the corruption of mankind, and then relates a story from his own life. Right here, in this brief moment on the bus, we see Neil Young reveal the exact form of thinking that created Cortez the Killer decades earlier. Cortez the Killer is an account of an actual man named Cortez and his adventures fighting Montezuma in the historical land of the Aztec Empire. It is also a mythological story about the Edenic purity of man prior to its corruption. It is also, at the end, revealed to be a lamentation for a lost love on the part of Neil Young himself. Neil Young sings a lot of songs about losing things. He's an emotional man and he is often grieving. All memory is, in a way, a form of grief, and when we extract poetry from our memories, there's always that hint of lamentation. Neil Young expresses that through his lyrics, his voice, and his guitar. This combination of expressive tools is what makes him a rocker. Every aspect is communicating the same thing with different nuance. It's a beauty that's impossible to encapsulate only with words. Thus, I am, in this essay, doing Neil Young a disservice. For that, I apologize. Neil Young combines these tools in a variety of ways. He experiments with a multitude of genres and instruments, although there's usually a guitar somewhere in there. Like most great artists, he has one or two things to say, and he says them in 1,000 different ways. Each different way has its own unique character. When combined, they make up a body of work that is an absolute unity as well as an eclectic mix. In the song Sleeps with Angels, Neil Young laments the death of Kurt Cobain. In You're My Girl, he laments the end of his daughter's childhood. In Thrasher, he laments a lot of things all at once in a creatively ambiguous sort of way. In T-Bone, he laments how he's got mashed potatoes, but he ain't got no T-bone. Is the takeaway here that Neil Young is a very sad man? Well, not exactly. The music is sad, but in a joyful sort of way. Joy and sadness are not opposite ends of a spectrum. There can be much joy in sadness if you know how to find it. Expressing your emotion in an artistic way is a beautiful experience, and finding expression for your emotions in someone else's art is beautiful too. It's a sharing, communicative sort of endeavor. Years later, Neil Young would say in an interview, "What the fuck am I doing writing about Aztec? What the fuck am I doing writing about Aztecs and Cortez the Killer like I was there, wandering around? Because I only read about it in a few books. A lot of shit I just made up because it came to me." I will tell you exactly what Neil Young was doing. He was being Neil Young. While writing about Cortez, he embodied the spirit of this mythological story so fully and so personally that it felt entirely natural at the end to sing the lines, "And I know she's living there, and she loves me to this day. I still can't remember when, or how I lost my way," despite them having in a literal sense no real connection to what had come before. Who's living there? And where exactly is she living? And when did you lose your way? You were just singing in the last stanza about the beautiful cities that the Aztecs built. By lost my way, do you mean you lost the plot of this song you were singing? Part 2. Neil Young's Dream. In the summer of the year 1797, the author, then in ill health, had retired to a lonely farmhouse between Porlock and Linton, on the Exmoor confines of Somerset and Devonshire. In consequence of a slight indisposition, an anodyne had been prescribed, from the effects of which he fell asleep in his chair at the moment that he was reading the following sentence, or words of the same substance, in Purchas's Pilgrimage. "Here the Kubla Khan commanded a palace to be built, and a stately garden thereunto, unless 10 miles of fertile ground were enclosed with a wall." The author continued for about 3 hours in a profound sleep, at least of the external senses, during which time he has the most vivid confidence that he could not have composed less than from 200 to 300 lines, if that indeed can be called composition, in which all the images rose up before him as things, with a parallel production of the correspondent expressions, without any sensation or consciousness of effort. On awaking, he appeared to himself to have a distinct recollection of the whole, and taking his pen, ink, and paper, instantly and eagerly wrote down the lines that are here preserved. At this moment he was unfortunately called out by a person on business from Porlock, and detained by him above an hour, and on his return to his room, found, to his no small surprise and mortification, that though he still retained some vague and dim recollection of the general purport of the vision, yet, with the exception of some 8 or 10 scattered lines and images, all the rest had passed away like the images on the surface of a stream into which a stone has been cast, but alas, without the after restoration of the latter. This is a quote from Samuel Taylor Coleridge's preface to the poem Kubla Khan, in which he describes the composition of said work. "One night I stayed up too late. I ate like 6 hamburgers. Felt terrible. I was studying history, and in the morning I woke up and I'd written this song." That's Neil Young on the composition of Cortez the Killer. These two passages tell the same story. A man is reading a history in an altered state. He falls asleep unexpectedly and dreams of a world influenced by his reading. He wakes up to find that in his dream he has composed a poem. Both accounts have a ring of truth and a ring of falsehood. Coleridge provides too many details and in this way betrays himself. Neil Young provides a paucity of detail. However, 6 hamburgers is probably an exaggeration. On a side note, I once met Neil Young in a dream, and all I could think to say to him was that I think the song Violent Side from the album Landing on Water is actually a very good song. I guess I figured that no one had ever said that to him before. In our dreams, we don't exactly see things the way they are. Our focus is narrowed and the blank space around us is filled in arbitrarily. Sometimes when we look away from someone and then look back, they've changed into someone else. In that moment, we rewrite history and retroactively confirm that this someone else has been there the whole time. Sometimes Japan and Canada need to be moved so that they are across the street from each other. The Pacific Ocean becomes what we often feel it to be in our waking life, an arbitrary excuse for planes to float around for 13 hours before landing again. Sometimes these changes are tiny, and sometimes they are cosmic. Sometimes rather than a mere physical change, we have to completely transform the past into the future in order to suit our emotional state. We are panicked, thus the world is going to end. We are hopeful, thus something amazing is about to happen. In the dreams of Coleridge and Neil Young, a fantastical world is contained uneasily within our world, a mess with contradiction, a sunny pleasure dome with caves of ice. In both the poem and the song, the narrator intercedes midway through to tell us enigmatically of a mysterious woman whose relation to the rest of the work is unclear. These women are important to the narrator in a way that cannot really be explained. Like many before and after them, Samuel Taylor Coleridge and Neil Young have fallen in love with a dream. They have fallen in love with a person with few or no distinct qualities, a pure being crafted entirely from longing and a sense of what the word love might mean when we don't try to put it into words. They have awoken with a deep feeling of loss, not only for the idyllic dream world, but for something deeper, some belonging or comfort that this woman, or should we say presence, has provided them. In the same vein, the lost paradises which they are eulogizing are mutations of a historical world. History is itself a fantasy world because you can never go there. It is an extrapolation from certain evidence. Historians extrapolate according to certain logical rules that ensure their accounts are mutually consistent. Poets extrapolate according to their whim, fancy, and, of course, their emotions. Coleridge wants a pleasure dome. Simple enough, don't we all? Neil Young is thinking about a lost love. Whether he had the love and then lost it, or whether he lost it before it even started, the effect is the same. All love points toward the future, because love is ideally supposed to last forever. When love falls apart, it brings a whole future down with it. When one experiences lost love, one is grieving both a person and a future. It can really do a number on you. It doesn't matter if this love existed only in a dream. It doesn't matter if the cause of this love in a dream is indigestion from eating 6 hamburgers or brain delusion from taking pain-killing drugs. Love is love, and the futures we imagine in a dream are just as real as the futures we imagine in real life, i.e., not real at all, but real in our hearts. As he does in Inca Queen, Like an Inca, and Pocahontas, Neil Young is idealizing a civilization about which, for a long time, little was properly known. He is telling a classic story of an Edenic paradise and its corruption. He is telling the story of a world attuned with nature, with ancient philosophical ideas that make ours look childish, where peace reigns and structures are able to be built that we still cannot even replicate. A world that is destroyed when a murderous man dances across the water, looking for his own slice of paradise. By discovering paradise, Cortez destroys it, because Cortez is a fallen man. Neil Young's Mesoamerica is not a historical reality. It is a dream. It is a dream built on love. It is the promise of an eternal paradise. Cortez destroys it by grabbing at it, by insisting too strongly that it should belong to him, and in the end he watches it crumble in his hands. As far as Neil Young is concerned, this is exactly what happened when Cortez went to Mesoamerica. He does not differentiate between his dream myth and real history. The myth is just as real as the chronicle. The myth evokes a universal sense of loss. When the Aztecs were wiped out, the world lost something. It's not particularly important what exactly the world lost, or whether the Aztec women actually were all beautiful, or whether they actually did build things with their bare hands that we still can't build today. Factually, we can say that most of what Neil Young says about the Aztecs in this song is not true. However, we still have this feeling that they might have been true about someone, if not specifically the Aztecs. That feeling comes from the knowledge that we, as we are now, are not perfect. We made a mistake somewhere. We could be better, as a nation, as a civilization, as a society, and as individuals. The last stanza, with its ambiguous longing, speaks to this. When Neil Young sings of a dream about Cortez and Aztecs and a woman living there, he's not telling us about Cortez and Aztecs and a woman living there. This woman waiting for us is a way that we could have been, that perfect paradise we could have preserved if we hadn't made the silly mistake of being a human being. God is pissed because he created man and then man turned out to be man. What if man had not turned out to be man? What if we had all grown up to be the person we aspired to be instead of the person we ended up as? There's a perfect version of ourselves that we threw away somehow or another. When did we do it? What did it look like? Asked Cortez. Neil Young is inviting us to live his experiences with him, to feel with him and to mourn with him about our lost futures. He is inviting us to share in being human in both a particular way and in a general way. It is the specifics that capture our attention. It is the generalities that capture our heart. Too vague and there's nothing to grab onto. Too particular and there's no way to relate. In Cortez the Killer, the image and the emotion are in such harmony that they bleed together into nonsense and it doesn't even matter. The image is not only an image and the feeling is not only a feeling. They're both things at once. You cannot analyze and synthesize this song into sense. The only sense comes from its illogicality. You can't read it one way and then the other. You can't read it as a history and then as a personal lamentation. It has to be both at once. I mentioned before that what makes Neil Young a rocker is the particular combination of expressive tools he uses. The electric guitar is a vital component here. The song begins and ends with extended guitar solos. We can't ignore these even if we don't necessarily have the tools to speak about them. The guitar tells its own wordless story, introducing us to the tone of the song a whole 3 minutes before Neil Young even begins to sing. After the last stanza, when the words have collapsed in on themselves, the guitar returns to finish the story. I can't translate for you what the guitar is communicating. I can only say that what it's communicating is as essential an aspect of the song as the lyrics themselves. Through the harmony of all these methods, we are pulled into the dream, and the dream is made to feel real. When the song ends and we are able to we emerge from the dream, that reality doesn't go away, or that feeling of reality doesn't go away. Part 3, Neil Young and History. After listening to this song enough times, I listened to a lecture series about Mesoamerica. I learned all sorts of information about the Aztecs, their culture, their practices, their language, and their history. I learned about Cortez, too, his circumstances and his particular idiosyncrasies. And yet when I think of the Aztecs, or Cortez, or Montezuma, I don't think of any of these facts. I just think of the song, Cortez the Killer. Is it appropriate that Neil Young, a man who admittedly knows little about the Aztecs or Cortez, should have this power? That his words speak to me more truly than the words of a man who has devoted his whole life to researching the facts of the matter? Seems a bit unfair, doesn't it? I'm saying this as someone who loves reading history books, who appreciates the work of archaeologists, and who thinks the discipline as a whole is pretty cool. But no matter what they do, they can't compete with literature and with art. The Bible is more interesting than any textbook. Paradise Lost makes more sense than the Big Bang, and Cortez the Killer is more evocative than any great courses lecture series. This is because they appeal to that most human quality, emotion. It's interesting in an intellectual sense that Cortez sailed across the ocean and fought Aztecs. It had a lot of repercussions and helped shape the world we know today. There were also a lot of antecedent events and circumstances that explain how and why it happened. It's part of this large web of data that we call history. But it only really matters if we also have some sort of emotional connection to the people involved. It only matters if the Aztecs mean something to us, either as a real people or as a symbol. We may be interested in their art or their astrology or their architecture and wish that it may have continued. Truthfully, much of this was all heavily influenced by the Maya, who are still around and you can go visit and talk to if you like, but it doesn't necessarily weaken the symbolic quality here. On the other hand, we may be interested in the Aztecs, as earlier generations were, as a particular form of savage tribe who partake in such gruesome acts as cannibalism and ritual sacrifice, and therefore celebrate Cortez for his heroic deed in wiping them off the face of the earth. In either case, the history takes on a mythological dimension, either the loss of something beautiful or the destruction of something evil. No matter how dryly you wish to present the facts, when they are presented to human beings, we will turn them into a story. It may be a simple moralistic story or a complex and ambiguous story. It may have complexity hidden within its simplicity or vice versa. The story we create often has more to do with what's inside us than what we are looking at. Neil Young read about the conquest of the Aztecs and tied it intrinsically to his emotional state, his favorite themes of love and loss, and these 6 hamburgers swirling around in his stomach, and thereby created a masterpiece. And in the end, as buildings crumple to pieces and history blows away in the wind, it's these stories and myths that will live on. That was Neil Young's Mesoamerica. Thank you for listening. If you listened or watched, I hope you enjoyed it. A little longer than usual, but it used to be even longer than that until I cut like a huge, completely unnecessary portion out of it. Anyway, that's the essay I wrote. Neil Young's Mesoamerica. Thanks for watching. Let me know what you think. This camera is looking at me from a different angle than usual. Maybe that's exciting. Maybe it's not. Who can say? Anyway, I'll see you all again. Goodbye.